Okay, I'll kick us off and then we'll let some people join in. I'm Kelly. On behalf of the Marketing Society, I want to welcome along to this First Roles Fundamental session today, which is kindly supported by our new sponsors, CalMac, who are here with us today. It's designed to be a pretty relaxed, informal session. So we do ask that you keep your cameras on and have a bit of chat with us if you can. We've got a brilliant session today, which is all around marketing metrics. So without further ado, I will hand over to Michael, who is going to take you through the session along with Frankie and Holly.
Thanks, Kelly. Morning, everyone. Thanks for making the time to join us today. As Kelly said, these are designed to be informal sessions. Hopefully, you'll just be able to get some nice practical takeaways that you can apply to your own day-to-day jobs. But yeah, just kind of bite-sized learnings that you can all hopefully get something good from. Frankie's first on there, but I'll go first for the intros. I'm Michael, the one in the middle, senior account manager at Cara, which is a media planning and buying agency, part of Dentsu, which is a kind of a global communications group with a presence in just about every market in the world. Been working there for about almost 6 years. So yeah, that's me. I'll hand over to Frankie and Holly to say hello.
Hi everyone. I'm Frankie. I work for Republic of Media. So we're also a media planning and buying agency based out of Edinburgh. We also have an office in Manchester. And my role there is as business director of digital strategy and innovation. I've worked within digital media for 9 years. So when it gets onto my part of the presentation, I'll be doing a bit more of a deep dive into kind of the digital metrics that matter within that landscape. I'm also chair of FLAG, which is the Future Leaders Advisory Group, which I think, Michael, you'll come on to in a second. And I'll let Holly introduce herself as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly McDonald. I am brand manager at Edrington, which is a spirits distribution company. I've been there for 4 years now. I was previously on Wyoming Whiskey, which was their American bourbon brand. But just this past week, I've actually moved into the innovation team on Glenrothes. So getting good experience across some different marketing areas there.
Brilliant. So before we get started, I probably should have mentioned in my intro as well that myself and Holly are also on the Future Leaders Advisory Group with Frankie. I've served as vice chair. With Frankie, I've been doing that for a couple of years now. It's flown in, but here's the simplified version of how that structure works. Because I appreciate sometimes it can be a lot of acronyms that fly around and kind of understanding who's who when it comes to the Marketing Society. So this just kind of distills it down. Essentially, the Future Leaders Advisory Group, or FLAG, we're kind of a shadow board, a shadow group of kind of younger or kind of mid-level marketing professionals. So it could be client side or agency side. And we kind of support and feed into the wider advisory board here in Scotland. So it's our job to make sure that the needs and priorities and what matters to people who are either just starting in their careers or maybe only a few years in, make sure that all the things that matter most to them are being reflected at a senior level. So essentially what we take responsibility for are the first role fundamentals, or the first role element of the Marketing Society, which is people who maybe haven't even started their first role yet, or just haven't a year up to 0 to 3 years experience, all the way up to future leaders members. So people who are getting on a bit more in their career, but are maybe aspiring more to a senior role, for example. We're here to kind of make that trajectory easier. So I think in a nutshell, we're your representatives in the Marketing Society in Scotland. So we run events throughout the year, obviously including this one that you're all at today. And we've got another in-person one coming up later in the week that I think Frankie will talk a bit about at the end of today's session. But we're here to help, basically, an accessible group. So if you've got any concerns or things that you want to get across, or things that matter to you in your job, no matter where you work in the marketing scene, we're the people to come to.
Oh,
And I think that pretty much summarizes it. I hope. Think done that a few times. Not sure how good that one was. So essentially, to get on to today's session, as Kelly kind of teed up today, it's all about metrics, marketing metrics, which again is quite a broad topic. But between myself, Holly, and Frankie, we've got some kind of different perspectives to bring to that. Holly's obviously client side, brand management, so quite a unique perspective there, which we're about to get onto. And then myself and Frankie both work agency side, but in kind of different parts of an agency. So we'll be bringing that to life a bit more later on. But I'll pass over to Holly now.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm a slightly different perspective from Michael and Frankie. So I'm going to dive in quite top level and kind of talk about what metrics would matter and how you would go about understanding where you should be tracking based on where your brand is in its life cycle. So from a brand manager's perspective, I would say there's no single metric that would tell you the full story. Things can look great on paper, but ultimately not pull through. And these kind of inputs and outputs all need to be looked at together and not in isolation. So starting very broadly, I think I've lost count of the amount of campaign dashboards, brand scorecards, commercial reports I look at on a daily basis. And if you're working on a brand, whether it's a huge giant or small startup, you're probably going to feel overwhelmed by metrics and just knowing where to start. Because they will be positive and they will be negative. Let's be realistic there. But I think the skill in brand management is knowing where to look and what to prioritize. And ultimately, it's up to you to boil it all down and discover what's actually going to drive growth. And that means balancing long-term brand health with short-term commercial results. And both of these require really different sets of measurement. So you also have to be looking at making sure that your budget is working as hard as it can. So you might not be surprised to see that the first metric on this screen is return on investment. And this is what you're going to be asked most about as a brand manager. Budgets can be so tight. And as you present your plans, especially to the wider business outside of the marketing function, it's the one thing that's going to make or break it. I think marketing budgets are just getting increasingly scrutinized, and being able to demonstrate that impact really is essential. So at its core, return on investment is about accountability, understanding what you're getting back for what you're putting in. But what return on investment doesn't explain is why performance is strong or weak. It's an outcome, not a diagnosis. So if we jump to the next slide, before you can start looking at return on investment or delving into specific metrics, you really need to be knowing where to invest. And hopefully this funnel isn't new to anyone, but it does help with the diagnosis stage and can outline where growth is stalling. So say you've nailed conversion, but not repeat purchase and loyalty, you then can understand that consumers are dropping off in that experience stage. And that's where you should be investing, and that's where you should be measuring. So it allows us to align brand and activation spend and ensures that marketing, product, commercial teams, they're all actively working together to solve the right problem and analyze the metrics that actually matter. So I'll dip into each of these quickly with some examples of activity and metrics that you may see addressing at each stage. So awareness, I guess, is the most basic brand question. Do people know who you are? Can they recognize your brand? Can they recall your brand? If people don't know you, you can't grow. Full stop. So if you're addressing an awareness problem, you might be looking at investing in brand equity campaigns, paid media, reviewing your packaging or even your assets. And then I guess there's a whole broad range of metrics here. You could be looking at a study that compares unaided awareness with aided awareness, looking to understand recall, what the reach of your campaign has been, an increase in your social following as a result of that, how many impressions your paid ads received. There's a lot you can do at this stage. And I guess in awareness, a lot of it is about test and learn to see what moves the dial, especially if you're working in a super highly competitive landscape. But then as we jump to the next one, consideration, you're moving from knowledge to preference here. So where consumers are deciding if they care about your brand, if it's relevant to them. So here you'd be looking at clear propositions and points of difference and starting to communicate this, where you can measure message takeaway, brand understanding, but you might also consider, an influencer campaign here, working with key opinion leaders. That can be a huge boost to consideration if consumers see a peer or someone they admire engaging with your brand, which I'm sure you all know. But overall, you'd be looking at whether activity has increased overall preference scores through a study or analysing the data to understand share of voice within your competitive set, metrics like those. And then to the next one, we're starting to see some action. Typically, this is also where you might see some drop off. Are consumers going to buy you now? If you are working with luxury items, higher priced goods or services, you may see a bigger difference between these two stages here as you move into conversion, but that obviously depends on what you're selling. Here you'd be looking at distribution, pricing, promotions, shelf visibility. These are all enormously important at this stage. And any friction here would mean that momentum and brand strength won't necessarily translate into sales. So metrics wise, you'd be focusing on penetration, points of distribution, rate of sale, just to understand what's letting you down here. And then experience, which I guess is the reality of your product and what you're selling. They've bought into your brand, but now what? Do they have buyer's remorse? Has it lived up to expectations? This is where your trust is built, or broken, I guess. And once it's broken, it's extremely hard to rebuild. So you'd be looking at quality, functionality, usability, user education here as your kind of key levers. But I would say there's also a not so tangible element here. And there's a lot of things here that are out with a marketer's control, like whether the product is engaged with in the right environment. As an example, this weekend it was sunny. I had an Aperol Spritz in the sunshine in a beer garden. I enjoyed it much better than I enjoyed the previous Spritz I'd had, which was sitting looking at the rain out the window. So there's a lot of like intangible things that you just cannot control that will ultimately impact product satisfaction, quality scores, sentiment scores. And this is where, yeah, it's harder, I guess, for a marketer to have a little bit of influence. And then as we move down, you're looking at loyalty. Will they choose you again? If trust was gained, you'd be looking at repeat purchase behavior over time. I guess it's worth noting that sustainable growth doesn't come from constantly recruiting new buyers. So that's a very expensive strategy. But increasing penetration, encouraging repeat purchase is absolutely crucial. So this can be really hard to maintain as well, especially in, those slightly less sexy categories, I would say, but it's not impossible. That's the brand team's job. I guess like Fairy Liquid would be a good example of this. I'm exclusively buy Fairy Liquid for washing dishes. I don't know why, but I'm just loyal to that brand. I think it's genuinely better than the rest. And that's a brand team's job. They've obviously done a really good job measuring the customer lifetime value, the share of the repertoire, the importance of their brand messages and how that's being received. This all has an impact in whether consumers continue to buy into your brand. And then final stage is advocacy. Will they recommend you? So you're feeling your earned growth, cultural relevance, recommendations, and active endorsement are ultimately what gives your brand that staying power. So you'd be looking at your broader brand purpose here, building out a brand community, having a distinctive world that they feel part of, maybe developing some really share-worthy experiences. So you'd be monitoring metrics through, positive reviews, social sharing, sentiment, user-generated content, satisfaction, scores, all of the above. And this is probably the part we see within, our social spaces as well. So yeah, jumping down, ultimately at brand manager level, you're looking to have a key understanding of these broader metrics and how they're laddering up before you can then dive further into those more specific areas. So I guess for me, the top three things I'm always thinking of is the brand strong in consumers' mind? Is the brand winning commercially? And is investment actually effective? And only by connecting all these kind of funnel metrics can you get a full picture and then dig deeper into understanding what levers and are performing and how you're balancing that growth. So I'm very aware that was, a whole bunch of marketing buzzwords there by way of introduction, but I'll hand over to Michael and Frankie, who'll dig into this a little bit more in their kind of specific areas of comms and digital.
Thanks, Holly. That's perfect. So yeah, as Holly said, now it's kind of looking into a more deep dive of what all that stuff kind of looks like from an agency perspective. So I'm going to kind of start with what it is I do on the day-to-day within the agency I work in, which is communications planning. So if you go into the next slide, essentially in a nutshell, what is communications planning or comms planning? It's the process of deciding how, where, when, and to who a brand should communicate its message to achieve specific marketing goals. So how this is, and it's such an interesting role really, because it's varied in the way that process can work. But generally the output looks a bit like what you're going to see on the following slide, which is essentially, sorry, I didn't hear that's my doorbell, which I'll ignore. But so comms planners are responsible for identifying the most effective mix of media channels to achieve a client's objectives and drive campaign success. Now, what that means is really going to vary greatly client to client and brief to brief. Those objectives could be anything from increase our reach by X%, drive this many conversions, for example. So there's not really a kind of one size fits all process for this. I think that's part of what makes it so interesting. But generally, this is what a kind of output might look like, but loads of work will have gone into the back of that. These different media mixes will have been scrutinized within an inch of their life to make sure that we're kind of wringing maximum value out of every single penny that a client invests into their media campaigns. So essentially, the starting point that I can say is true for any client or campaign that we work on is the brief. So I've kind of given an overview of what the brief looks like on the next slide. So I think this is quite a universal thing, no matter where it is any of the organizations you all work in. If you're a client side or agency side, you're either going to write or receive a brief at some stage. It's kind of the starting pistol for anything that you're working on. But from my perspective, it's provided by the client to us to help kind of guide and kick off that comms planning process. And these are the things that we would tend to look for. And this is not exhaustive by any means, there's more. But these are the types of things we would need to really start developing a good response to a client's brief. So what are the business challenges you're currently facing? Who's your target audience? I think that, to be honest, if it's not the most important, is certainly one of, because depending on who it is we're looking to speak to and who a brand's target audience is, everything about that media mix is going to be dictated by that primarily. We need to be activating in the places that we know that audience are. The media landscape now is incredibly fragmented, and people's relationship with different media channels is quite unpredictable and quite algorithmically led, to be honest, now that we have to be one step ahead of that. What's the media budget? That always helps. That stops from saying, let's just get some TV on the go in case you can't afford it. What creative assets do you have available? Quite an interesting one, this. I mean, I think the best way, from in my experience, that the best campaigns that I've seen come to life is when a media agency and a creative agency and a client are all working in unison with one another. Maybe from the word go, to be honest, we're all kind of agreeing what those priorities are. That's kind of that's the best case, but it's not always realistic. Sometimes brands do their own creative in-house. Sometimes creative agencies have got assets that have been delivered to the client well before a media plan's been looked at. So as I say, I always prefer for those things to happen at the same time, but it's not always as simple as that. So it's good to know what kind of creative output we have access to, because again, that's going to guide a media proposal, to be honest. Because say we did some audience planning work and saw that an audience massively over-indexed against video on demand, for example, or online video, and the client didn't have any video, then we're not going to waste our time developing a whole plan around that when it's just not going to be practical. So it's more of a practical consideration there. But then finally, and what I'm going to kind of dig into more detail, is what are your objectives and how will success be measured, which is really tying into the metrics theme of today's session. So breaking that down, some key terminology just to remember is the different classification of objectives that, again, I think we're all going to come across at some stage in our careers, whether you're writing or receiving this brief. So business objectives, this is essentially, what does the company want? What does the brand want? So these are the big picture goals that are really tied to revenue and growth. They're owned by all parts of the business, specifically business leadership, not just the marketing teams that we all work in or the agencies that we all work in. It's kind of the overarching direction of the business. So quite broad brush kind of examples like increase total revenue by 20%, launching a new market, grow market share, improve profitability, all things, levers that we can influence through like marketing functions and working in agencies. But these are big kind of business jobs to be done. So all teams within a business are going to contribute here. This then kind of filters down into marketing objectives. So this brings to life, how will we support the wider business goals? And by we, I mean probably everyone on this call, whether you're client side or agency side. And so these are the more measurable targets that support those business objectives, but actually provide a kind of framework for evaluating success. So you'll notice these are just getting that bit more specific than the business objectives were. So increase brand awareness among 18 to 34-year-olds from a specific percentage to another. So from 40 to 60, generate 50,000 new leads, customer retention by 10%, grow app usage by 50% in the next 12 months. So these are just examples, but you can see how these are slightly more specific and targeted and focused than kind of the broad brush business objectives. And then this filters down kind of into the final stage, which in my day-to-day, I'd probably start calling like media objectives, but it's broader than that. These are the key performance indicators or KPIs, which are the acronym that basically haunts everyone in their sleep, to be honest, KPIs, which I think we can all get our heads around. These are the things that we are kind of measured against. Certainly from, I think this is true from having not worked client side, I'm kind of assuming here, we're all kind of judged against our KPIs, basically. These are the things that are going to move the dial on those marketing objectives that we looked at before, the real kind of measurable, targeted metrics that we can use in real time to evaluate how close we are to achieving those marketing objectives. So really specific and tactical here. Reach 80% of the target audience at least 3 times, achieve 10 million impressions within 4 weeks, get 25,000 website visits from a certain paid channel, deliver a cost per click of under £1.50, quite digitally focused there, which Frankie will bring to life later on. But yeah, these are kind of the certainly when you're kind of more working day-to-day agency side, these are the things you spend most of your time not worrying about, but thinking about the KPIs, to be honest, because these are what we're measured against in terms of our delivery. So what I've done is I've pulled together a list, and again, not an exhaustive list. These are just the KPIs that quite often from a media or comms perspective come up. These are the things that I think you could apply to 9 out of 10 campaigns, to be honest, that they're going to be measured in some way, but there'll be plenty more beyond this and a lot more campaign specific metrics. But some kind of common ones that you'll see are reach, so the number of unique individuals exposed to an ad or a campaign. You then have, just the next slide, frequency. Now this is the average number of times a person saw the ad. And then when these two come together, which is kind of like the holy grail of media, to be honest, you have your optimal reach and frequency, basically. So the way this is articulated is, for example, 1+ reach of 92% means that 92% of our target audience was exposed to the campaign at least once. That can then go even further. It's like 3+ reach. So 3+ reach of 61% would mean that 61% of our target audience was exposed to the campaign across any channel. This could be from where I sit in the agency. This could be from outdoor, it could be TV, it could be digital. They've been exposed to that. 61% of the audience have been exposed to the campaign at least 3 times. This is quite often a bit of a sweet spot for clients. 1+ reach, the previous slide, is generally quite high, but 3+ is when you can kind of guarantee enough exposures for the campaign to have made some sort of impact. I wish there was a magical kind of optimal frequency that you can apply across all channels. It's completely disingenuous to say that there is, because there isn't, but this is something that I would generally provide to a client in a response to 1+ and 3+ reach. You've then got impressions. So this is the total number of times an ad is shown or displayed across any media channel. And impressions is basically reach times frequency. So this is the total times that an ad could have been seen, when it's displayed, when it's shown on digital, when it's played on TV, when somebody sees an out-of-home site. These are the total kind of opportunities to see, basically. You've then got cost per thousand, which is probably the most common media metric across all channels that you can apply. The reason why I think it's so popular is because you can use it across the majority of offline and digital channels. Just essentially cost per 1,000 impressions. And when you're working kind of media day in, day out, this is just something you get used to talking about way too normally. So essentially the wisdom is that the lower the CPM, the more cost efficient and effective a channel is going to be. I wouldn't always agree with that, because then it becomes a bit of a race to the bottom, to be honest. You might get a really low CPM for a channel that's churning out a load of rubbish. So you want to make sure you're looking at quality of impressions before you start looking at your cost per thousands. But this is something that you're going to certainly come up against when it comes to scrutinizing a media plan. From an efficiency point of view, this is definitely a metric you look at. You've then got share of voice. So this is something that quite often as part of a client brief we'll be looking to shift, which is our brand visibility or noise versus competitors in the market. Again, a kind of common learning you can apply to this is that your share of voice should exceed your share of market wherever possible. This is how you're going to get excess share of voice, is what that's called, where basically you're shouting louder than competitors, and that's how you're going to capture more share within that market. Quite common with like smaller challenger brands that we work with. It's about kind of increasing the share of voice. You've then got return on ad spend, which, depending on the type of business you work for, is basically the holy grail. This is probably the metric that finance teams are the most interested in. This is the revenue that's generated per £1 spent on marketing, basically. So, and I think Frankie will touch on this later on, this is something that's very tied to digital channels, because you can kind of, that direct attribution between digital activity and money coming into the business is a lot easier to measure. It's a lot more challenging when it comes to offline channels like TV, radio, and outdoor. Measuring like a full return on a multimedia campaign is still quite a tricky thing to do. So you quite often have to develop a specific measurement framework for a bigger campaign like that. But yeah, certainly when you're looking at digital, this will be, depending on the business that it is, this will be something that's very, very important. And then just finally, campaign evaluation studies. And this is essentially what I was mentioning before, which is for those larger multimedia campaigns where maybe you've got TV, outdoor, radio, and digital all playing a role. You cannot accurately quantify a total return against that. So you're going to want to come up with a kind of evaluation measurement structure that you can measure that campaign against. So, for example, a common partner I would work with for that is YouGov, for example, who can do pre and post wave campaign reporting, basically tell you what the state of play is before your activity ran and then afterwards, and kind of measure the unique contribution of each media channel against those outcomes. So, yeah, I mean, this is something that I think in marketing circles is still a question. I remember even at those who were at Navigate last week in Glasgow, it's still something that's spoken about. It's still a problem that marketers face, which is kind of this multimedia measurement stuff. But I think it's important when you're working across on the job, like offline and digital channels, to think about your measurement framework and what success is going to look like at the outset before you get started. So yeah, that's pretty much a whistle-stop tour of broad media comms objectives and measurements and metrics you might look at. But I think this is my last slide, otherwise this is a bit awkward. I'm going to pass over to Frankie for kind of a digital deep dive.
Thank you. I think the order we've done things in makes perfect sense. So just to explain to everyone, Holly sitting on client side, she might brief out her agency for her brand. Michael would work on the comms planning team at that agency. He'll then go away, do some YouGov work and discover, well, actually the audience for this brand live primarily on social, or they watch a lot of YouTube. And then Michael would then brief out the digital team, who would then go and make a digital plan off the back of that. But the thing with digital media, it's very measurable. So both Holly and Michael touched on that idea of like some offline media or some marketing metrics being quite intangible. So the example of sipping an Aperol Spritz and enjoying it more in the sunshine versus when it's raining. Like, we're not exactly going to get that data. You could do surveys and ask people that, but it's not data that comes in a daily report to you. Whereas with digital media, you have so much data, it's almost overwhelming at times. So as I put there, with more data sometimes comes more confusion. And then off the back of that, you have scope for poor decision making because you're analyzing your data wrong. So what I'm going to do is kind of go into a almost real world, maybe my fantasy example of a campaign, but we'll get onto that. Just to give an example of ways in which you can analyze data well, but also analyze it in the wrong way too. But first of all, I want to speak to why it's important not only to have data, but how you translate that data. So let's imagine for a second we're in a world where robots become our doctors, and you go to them, you want to figure out what's going on with you, and this is what the robot says to you. Your LDL cholesterol is 160, and I have to look at my notes here, milligrams per deciliter, up from 155 milligrams per deciliter last week, but down from 165 milligrams per deciliter last month. Blah, blah, blah. It goes on. You as the patient, you don't know what any of that means. It doesn't make sense to you. You get there's a lot of data. It feels very valuable. But as a human being, you're like, okay, what? So what you really needed to hear was your cholesterol is a bit high. So I recommend cutting back on fried foods and adding 30 minutes of exercise per day. Your heart rate is improving, which is great. Adding in more activity will help keep this up. So the doctor has all that data at their fingertips in that format. They just need to make it digestible in a way for you as the patient to understand. And then most importantly, they need to give you an action off the back of that. So yeah, keep exercising, cut back on those fried foods. So then you as the patient are going away like, okay, I know what I need to do. I've had the expert opinion on this. Now I know what I'm doing. And that's essentially for us working in digital media, us working as a media agency, having clients, we need to make all that data at our fingertips understandable for them. So I mentioned like a fantasy scenario. So let's say Holly works for Graham Norton's marketing team. They've briefed out Michael. He's done the YouGov work and said, like, okay, they're looking to expand their listenership, but to do that, they need to increase discovery. So people need to know that this podcast exists. Maybe their audience is 25 to 50. Michael's done the audience analysis. He's saying, they live on these channels. They're watching YouTube, they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, and actually they're on Reddit as well. So let's pull together a media plan where we have those assets. So Michael, you touched on the creative assets as well. So let's say we have like little bite-sized cut downs of the podcast that show Graham and Maria laughing, funny bits that make people be like, that looks like a really funny podcast. I'm going to go and listen. So when I or someone in my team sets that campaign live, we'll have all the metrics coming from each individual platform. So we'll get metrics from YouTube, we'll get metrics from TikTok, Reddit, Facebook. But it's important we use kind of a third-party platform to really make sure those platforms themselves aren't what we say is marking their own homework. So they might, like Facebook might tell us like, we're getting really high quality views, sound on, blah, blah, blah. But we want to make sure we can trust the data we're getting from them. So there's multiple platforms out there that do this. The one that we use at Republic Media is called Integral Ad Science. And basically it helps us track the metrics we get from different platforms and then turn it into more kind of quality, meaningful metrics. So instead of just thinking about impressions, we might look at average time in view, and we also might look at viewability as well. Now, this screen grab here, if I sent this to the client, who's Holly in this scenario, she's probably going to be like, what is this? I don't understand. It's useful for me because I've been working in digital media for 9 years, but it doesn't translate that well. So what's important is we make sense of data for clients. Otherwise, this is the scenario. So again, thinking about that robot scenario, this is me on a client call and I'm saying YouTube has a viewable rate of 80%, an average time in view of 14 seconds. Facebook has an average time in view of 4.5 seconds and a viewable rate of 46%. Reddit has a viewable rate of 6 to 8% and an average time in view of 1 second. TikTok has a viewable rate of 15% and an average time in view of 8.2 seconds. I am now in marketing jail because that was really boring and no one knows what I'm talking about. Like, I work in digital day to day, so I'm like, I know exactly what I'm saying, but the client is like, I have 10 million other things going on. I'm not just thinking about digital day to day. So that is very boring. And if you're translating data, make sure you're not doing it in that way. And that for me is something that's going to become more and more important. If we think about the way AI is going to maybe do auto reporting for people or auto dashboards, your human input is going to become increasingly important in terms of how you translate that data. So this is a skill set that everyone should be working on now. Like, how do I not only analyze data, but make it digestible for someone that I'm speaking to? So always remember that doctor analogy that I put up front of like, it's important that your doctor is human and not a robot in terms of making sense for you as the patient. This chart here, I probably wouldn't put in a presentation, but it might be something that I send to the client ahead of a presentation to be like, I'm going to be talking about these metrics. Here's just what they mean to me. So rather than me talking about average time in view, I maybe say to the client, overall, when people stop to watch your ad, so they're scrolling on TikTok, this is how long on average they spent with it. And then viewable/audible rate, ads need to be on screen for 1 second or longer to be counted as viewable, and sound needs to be on to be counted as audible. So a higher percentage here means you survived people scrolling. So if the ad isn't even on screen for 1 second, someone scrolled past it or they skipped it. So it's a low quality environment if it's less viewable. So we have that data at our fingertips, but make sure people understand exactly what you mean. I won't go into each individual thing here and just read out the text on the screen because again, that's marketing faux pas just to do that. But this is the kind of thing that I would send to the client ahead of time. Another important thing is that analogies help us communicate metrics as well. So let's go back to this. So we're looking at viewability and audibility by media partner. We have average time in view and we have viewable audible rate. Instead, an easier way to explain that to people, and I'm sorry for the AI image, but it does help me. So on the left, we have Reddit. From that chart, we knew I had high viewability, but low time in view. So the way that I think about that is, say it's a shop and you have all these people walking past. Everyone that walks past glances in the window. You're selling a dress in this scenario, but no one stays to look. So everyone sees it, but no one spends any time with it. So bringing that back to the scrolling scenario, the ad does spend at least a second on the screen, but once it's done, people are scrolling past. I know as a marketer like that, people are pretty ad avoidant on Reddit, so that makes sense to me. On Facebook, you have medium viewability, but low time in view. So half the people that walk past glance, but that glance always turns into a look. So people actually scroll past quicker on Facebook than they do on Reddit. But when they are stopping, they're all taking a chance to look at it. So there's a little bit more quality when someone spends time to stop. You've got more chance of getting a video view than you would on Reddit, for example. And then on TikTok, low viewability, so people scrolling even faster, but medium time in view. So when they do stop to look, they're actually spending time. So let's say 7 out of 10 people walk past that shop, but of the 3 that do, they all walk into the shop. So it's about once you grab people's attention, are you then able to hold it? And then TikTok is a platform where that's good because it's a video platform. People are typically watching it with sound on. They're there to watch video. Whereas if someone's spending time in the Facebook newsfeed, they might just be killing time. They're doom scrolling. Not to say you can't doom scroll on TikTok, but at the end of the day, you are looking for content to watch and entertain you. So it's a good for getting that high attention and dwell time once people do stop scrolling. And then YouTube, high viewability, high time in view. So to take it back to the shop analogy, most people that go past the shop, they end up walking in and trying the product on. So it's a really quality video environment. If you're watching YouTube, you're not really scrolling unless you're on YouTube Shorts. You're there maybe to watch even longer form content than you would on TikTok, Facebook, or Reddit. You're in a video environment. So we always say to clients, if they've got a video asset and they want someone to watch a video asset, YouTube's a good platform to be on. So let's just be real and have a chat instead. So YouTube's doing the best overall. Michael, I can see you on the screen. I'm going to have to move you.
Okay.
YouTube's doing the best overall, but it's not really fair to compare YouTube ads to TikTok or Instagram, where people are more passively engaging. You'll never get that many people spending long periods of time with the ads, but our audience are spending a huge amount of time on scrolling platforms, so we can't afford to not be present. We're reducing our Reddit spend because it was really a bit of a test to see if we could get people watching content, but it's almost impossible to get people watching video ads on there. I might say that we need to edit our TikTok content to increase our viewability rate. People are really speeding past it, so we need to make sure we have Graham Norton in the first frame to kind of capture people's attention and the big laughs up front. And that's something you'll see a lot of social content looks like. They'll edit it so the funniest part or the most exciting part of a video happens up front to grab your attention, and then the video starts from the start to then make you be like, oh, what caused that huge sort of laughter within that moment? So you'll probably notice that yourselves, that a lot of advertisers do that to grab your attention. Michael, I'm moving you back. I know you can't see yourself, but I can see you. You're a big square.
That's right.
So it sounds simple enough. So I'm focusing a lot here on average time in view as a measure of quality. So Michael, you talked about impressions. We want to think more deeper than impressions. So not just an ad landing on screen, but people spending time with it. So in this scenario, the average time in view on Instagram Reels is 3.4, but on TikTok is 2.8. So looking just at this metric, you might be like, great, let's just move all of our budget into Instagram Reels then, job done. But what's really important is you look at the wider context. So as I said, we have so much data available to us when we're working in digital. So you can't just kind of zero in on one metric that you think is important without looking at the wider context. So in that scenario, let's look at a bit of a fuller report. So Instagram Reels has a higher time in view than TikTok, but actually we can see on TikTok, we've had way more 6-second views. So How has that happened? I don't understand. Oh wait, we've spent 25 grand on TikTok and 4 grand on Instagram Reels. This is the kind of thing a client might see in a report and go, why have we spent so much on TikTok when we're getting higher time and view on Instagram Reels? But actually, when both platforms were at the £1,000 spend stage, you might have found that TikTok had a 5 second average time in view and Instagram had a 3.8 second time in view. And at that point, you were optimizing towards TikTok because it had a higher time in view. The more you spend, the more you start to increase that frequency that Michael touched on. Once someone's already watched the Graham Norton ad, they're not going to watch it again. So your average time in view will start to go down. And at that point, you might start to think about moving your budget around. Especially when things like your cost per view might start to increase. So again, they might have been on a par at similar spend levels, but now we've spent much more on TikTok. That cost per view is starting to go up because more people are scrolling past the ad. So at this point, you might start to think about moving money into Instagram Reels. So just important to think about the digital ecosystem being complex with multiple metrics to take into consideration. You have to consider what matters most based on both the business objectives and the platform metrics too. So again, thinking back to that doctor analogy, we always want to give business action. So we're not just saying, here's what's happening, but what are we doing off the back of those learnings? So if this was my campaign, I'd say, look, we're going to pause the Reddit trial. Video doesn't work on Reddit, and there's no point testing statics, because in some scenarios you might be like, well, if people are spending a second with the ad, like, can we test some statics? But in that scenario, we're like, no, it's a funny podcast. We want people to watch the video content to then be inspired to listen to the full podcast. So in that scenario, no, we're not going to test statics. Let's forget about Reddit. It's not worked. It was a trial. I might say YouTube's working really well for driving quality views, but we're not going to move all of our budget there because we'll miss out on new audiences from socials. So again, taking it back to the audience work that Michael might have done, there might be like really quality views on YouTube, but maybe our audience is spending way more time on TikTok, or they're spending way more time on Instagram, or we're seeing that actually we're getting more traffic from those platforms than we would from YouTube. So YouTube balances it out, but the reach might not be there that we need from the social platforms. You also need to think about your competitors. If they're running tons of ads on TikTok and Instagram, you maybe want to make sure you're present there as well. So that's just an example of, don't just hone entirely in on the metrics. You have to look at the wider context of what's happening with not only your business, but competitors as well. And then you might say, we spent a lot on TikTok and performance is starting to dip in comparison to Instagram Reels now, where we spent less. So there's an opportunity there. So we're going to shift budget to Instagram Reels, and we'll monitor the cost of that cost per second view. So that's just a kind of very honed in example of a campaign that you might work on, but I think it's also important to think about just metrics overall and whether they're valuable. Impressions Michael touched on, and I hope I've now made a case for it, that you need to start thinking about not just impressions, so not just your ad showing on a screen, but is it a quality impression? So within the industry, we're talking a lot about attention right now. That might be a simple metric like high time in view. So don't just zone in on we've delivered loads of impressions, as Michael said. We have a low CPM. Great. That doesn't mean anything unless it was a valuable impression. Clicks again. Oh, I go to the client. Oh my God, hundreds of thousands of clicks on your ad. If that was me, I'd be like, okay, and then what? What happened after people clicked? Like that's quite meaningless. So everyone should have, if you've got a website, you should have Google Analytics on there. And that'll tell you what's happening after people have clicked on your ad. So it's really about website visits, not clicks. So one platform could have a really low cost per click, but when you go on Google Analytics, it's not actually translating into people spending any time on the website. So look at the website visits instead. Click-through rate, similar kind of story. So you can't really compare, YouTube's got a really low click-through rate versus Instagram, so we're going to take out investment. Well, actually, YouTube's a really high attention platform, and someone might watch YouTube on their TV and then go onto your website from their phone. So they're not clicking through on their TV. So it's not the most valuable metric in the world. Again, look for website visit rate instead. If you have a traffic campaign, that's a much more valuable picture of if people are spending time on your website. view through it again. You can't really compare like for like. So YouTube is a very different video platform to TikTok. It will have higher view through rates. That's not to say that being on TikTok is not a valuable place to be. So always compare to benchmarks on that specific platform. So compare TikTok to a previous TikTok campaign you've ran, or even TikTok and Instagram Reels are a bit more comfortable to compare because they're very similar formats. But yeah, don't just compare BVOD to YouTube to TikTok because you're running video assets. Like that's not a fair reflection. You really need to be thinking about the how and the why of people using those platforms. CPC, so cost per click, for campaigns with the main goal of site visits, this might be a KPI on something like Google Ads, on your search ads, as the main measure of efficiency. But again, make sure you're looking at your cost per website visit again. So it really becomes meaningful once you see what people are doing on your website. Conversions of the goals to drive sales. This will be one of the main metrics. I'm happy with that. I think that's quality. That's about as measurable as it gets. Revenue for accounts that are able to track revenue. This may be one of the most important figures. But again, not everything is super digital. So there are products you'll see ads for on YouTube, but you buy them in the supermarket. So looking at revenue on Google Analytics is not a reflection of whether your campaign is doing well in that regard. And then brand studies are really helpful. Both Holly and Michael have touched on these. We can do them within the digital landscape as well. So we can run them on Meta, TikTok, Reddit, for example. And it's a valuable addition to any media plan and help you demonstrate the effects of more hygienic metrics like an impression or a view. So you look at actually, we've improved ad recall when we run this specific creative versus this other creative. So it's a really good lever to pull, and it usually impresses clients as well. It's far more valuable than just the generic metric reports. And that's it. Bit of a whistle-stop tour. As I said, there's so much to digital that we couldn't cram into this session. But I think the way we've laid it out in terms of Holly client side, Michael going into comms planning from an agency perspective, and then really honing in on the digital aspect of it as well, hopefully helps bring to life all the different kind of marketing metrics that are important to all of us and how they speak to each other as well. So that's all from us, but it'd be great to hear if there are any questions from you guys. I can't see anyone. So if anyone's got their hand up or anything, I can't see.
Hi, I was just gonna I'm Stephanie. Oh, but I was just gonna ask, and it's kind of going back to the brief point, like at the beginning. I'm on agency side, so sometimes clients do not give that full great brief that you kind of highlighted, Michael. So kind of just advice on, would I then go back with those kind of questions to kind of get those answers? Yeah, just because sometimes they don't paint the full picture of what they're looking for.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's something that I've come across loads of times. And I think generally what it's called is going back and interrogating the brief. I don't think you need to say that, but it's you're sent any question that you need answered that's going to make your response better, which is why the client's working with you, working the agency in the first place. They want the best possible response. Absolutely go back and ask if there's any sort of missing. I've had briefs where there's been like fundamental stuff missing, like who they are and how much money they've got, like the type of thing you'd have to go back. But even if there's like a smaller detail that you want them to iron out, definitely go back, because I think that's part of our job, is to get because brief writing, I think, is a skill, and it's something that in client side it's very, very busy. I'm sure Holly can attest to that. The days are absolutely mobbed. Sometimes you'd like to dedicate X amount of time to writing a really crafted brief, but sometimes you just have to get something over the line. So it's good if it's a dialogue rather than just here's my brief with no follow-ups. So I think that's always go back. It's not cheeky.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, I'm sorry, I don't know if this is working or not. It's froze for me. But yeah, I was just wondering more about share of voice, like kind of what that means, and how it's measured. I know you did talk about it, but it's actually the first time I've really heard about that before. So it's just to yeah, understand that a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly start. It can be, I think, understood differently depending on where you sit. When I'm talking about it, it's if we get, say, like a new kind of brand or a client into a certain space or a certain category, it's quite often like with smaller challenger brands who are maybe kind of taking to task a bigger established market leader, a set of market leaders. What we can do is do using the tools that we've got access to background to what their competitors' ad spends are, to what their campaigns look like. It gives us an impression of what competitor activity is, and it means we can broadly kind of suss out how that market is currently split between brands, who's the got the loudest voice in there, who's spending the most on comms, for example, who's doing the most paid activity, and then we can kind of measure and decide our tactical response based on that. So it's basically just getting brands to shout louder by if you outspend essentially if you own like a small piece of the market, but you invest in marketing or advertising like you're bigger than you are, which is kind of what the excess share of voice piece is. The logic behind that is that you will then grow market share from that fact because you're kind of increasing your visibility and how out there you are. There are definitely different ways that share of voice can be categorized, but for us, it's basically that it's knowing exactly what the competitor landscape is and what we can do tactically to make a big impact so that we can increase our share of voice quickly within that market. But Polly and Frankie might have different perspectives on that, but that's generally how I would understand it.
No, thank you. That's really good.
No worries.
Anyone else before I go on to events? No, quite happy.
We're good.
Okay, upcoming events. So obviously we're in the first role fundamentals program right now. And the kind of cohort above that is the future leaders cohort. So kind of people that are maybe at manager level, 3 years and above, looking for that next step up in their career. Our next event is next Thursday, and that's practical skills for the digital era. That's excitingly happening at the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo. So yeah, next Thursday, 30th of April, 3:30. So if there's anyone in your organization at that level, please kind of let them know that that's happening. There's also trend spotting happening on the 3rd of June at 9:30 at the Social Hub in Glasgow, which is a really great venue. Kelly, do you want to maybe speak a little bit more about trend spotting? Because I've actually never been to it.
Yeah, they're really good, quite informal events. It's all about different trends. So my colleague Joanne runs that one. So I don't have full details of that at the moment, but I definitely suggest looking out for it. And just to confirm, Future Leaders is actually this Thursday.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
Actually
this
in 2 days' time.
running away from me. And then our last one is the Star Awards. So the Marketing Society event of the year, the one everyone wants to go to, is on the 18th of June at 6:30 at the Corn Exchange in Edinburgh. Are there still tickets available for that, Kelly?
There are, yes.
Amazing. So yeah, again, if you're not like you haven't currently got a ticket, maybe reach out to your organization or think about getting one yourself because they're really valuable. They're really fun. And also an amazing opportunity to network and meet some people too. It's kind of the highlight of the year, definitely within my agency's calendar. And I know for a lot of people client side as well. So definitely watch out for that one. And if you're not going this year, definitely like your market for years to come.
And definitely do get in touch with us if you're a student, because sometimes we have agencies that will hand their tables over that have booked tables, can't fill them, and they'll have a couple of places available. So do let us know if you do want to attend.
Brilliant. That's everything from us. Thank you so much for coming along. And thank you to CalMac for sponsoring as well. Keep your eyes peeled for the next First Role Fundamentals event. We are planning it next week, so we'll let you know kind of what that will entail, but more to come from us in terms of First Role Fundamentals. I'm going to stop sharing now so I can see everyone.
I'd just like to say on behalf of the Marketing Society, thank you, Frankie, Holly, and Michael. I think that was a really insightful and brilliant session. And yeah, thanks again to CalMac. And of course, these sessions are designed to be for you guys. So please, if you've got any kind of feedback, anything you'd like to see at future sessions, please do email and let us know, because they're designed to be your sessions. So we'd love to hear from you before we start our planning for 2027, which I know sounds mental, but we're already in May.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.